they have failed, they are failing, and they will continue to fail in curbing greenhouse gas emissions. And these approaches violate the rights of indigenous peoples, of women in all their diversities, and of local communities. And yet, we see that plenty of public climate finance is still put forward, developing and supporting these very harmful false solutions. So today we are here with our member groups, friends and allies at SB58 to hear from actually this outstanding panel here about how all of this works and how a corporate co-opting of global climate policy is leading to these inequitably policy and finance flows that are going to false solutions, and how these are actually being pushed in the UNFCCC agenda. So we'll start first with Peg Pucht from Environmental Paper Network. Then we have Camila Romero from Colectivo Viento Sur. We'll go, then we'll open the floor for Andrea Echeverry from Global Forest Coalition, and then the last panelist will be Soparna Lahiri, also from Global Forest Coalition. So, Peg, you have the floor.
Thank you. So, my area of work is forest, climate, and biomass energy. And so it's the public funding of biomass energy and the problems with that I'm going to address today. Funding for burning forest biomass at scale in large energy generation facilities is a prime example of the least effective and most destructive way to deploy the forests of the world as we struggle to combat climate change. According to the IPCC, 22% of global emissions comes from AFLU, the land and forest sector. Aiding and abetting these emissions via public financing, government subsidies and incentives is just madness. The IPCC told us very clearly in their AR6 report, in the mitigation section, that protecting and restoring natural forests is paramount and the most effective action that we can take, and that it can be done quickly and effectively and at fairly low cost relatively. Of course, we're firm in also recognising the fact that the best custodians of the forests are their Indigenous guardians and local communities who have relied on them and in whose care they have survived and flourished, and will continue to do so if we only respect that this is the way to do it. Importantly, the IPCC also pointed out something that's pretty obvious when you think about it. The logging of carbon-rich natural forests is not recoverable through any sort of regrowth or planting by 2050. An entire forest just can't spring back in time to meet the Paris guidelines. So by funding, putting all its carbon into the atmosphere to get some energy, we're actually making the situation worse. So it just can't meet the timeline for net zero emissions, and of course the forests are not going to be allowed to grow back, are they? By and large, they're going to continue to be logged, and that's going to expand under the incentive that comes from funding for that intensification of logging and the further penetration of logging, because it becomes more profitable to go into the forests and log them for energy under all the sorts of enabling conditions that governments are putting in place. So why is this happening? Why are the world's forests being plundered and burnt as a climate solution, and under some rationale that don't worry, they'll grow back, when the science says otherwise? It all comes back to the UNFCCC and a fundamental flaw in the carbon accounting here. The energy sector accounts show emissions for the fossil fuels. When you look in the energy sector carbon accounts, you see an emission for coal, for oil, for gas. You see a zero for bioenergy, despite the fact that burning forests emits at least as much carbon dioxide as burning coal per unit of energy produced, and usually more. because it's less efficient. It's all meant to be showing up in the land sector accounts, but that's never there as an emission. It's all mashed in with everything else in a stock change. You're meant to infer what might have been coming from bioenergy, but policymakers generally don't know that. They just see a zero next to the emissions in the energy sector, and they hear this stuff about it'll be carbon neutral because it'll grow back, and away they go with all these incentives. I might also add that as this situation has evolved and the expansion of destruction of forests for bioenergy is becoming larger and larger and larger, it's going like a runaway train, then there's a huge trade developed in this biomass wood, so that often the responsibility for the emissions are actually in another country than the one that burnt the energy. So we're getting an element of climate colonialism coming in as the forests come out of the global south. Europe doesn't account those emissions from burning the wood, and it is, you know, around 55–60% of renewable energy in Europe, for example. But the country of the global south that actually grew that wood is responsible for those emissions. It's absolutely an outrage. So we have to make sure that public financing, we've got to fix the accounting, but we also have to make sure that public financing and government support does not continue to increase this travesty. We've got at the moment the spectre of 2.3 million hectares of forest in Indonesia at a minimum being dedicated to burning for biomass, and we know that the Asian Development Bank is right in there funding that massive destruction under this huge misapprehension. That's just one example. So we need the UNFCCC to wake up, but we need the various development banks and governments to cease this public funding support and direct it to the much cheaper and more effective option of keeping our forests growing. They're really good for keeping carbon out of the atmosphere just as they are.
Thanks, Beck. Camila, you're next? Okay, go ahead.
Muy buenas tardes. Good afternoon. Thank La tinta correría por las hojas, como corrió la sangre y lágrimas de los otros árboles muertos en la guerra que llamaron pacificación por estos cerros de Chayenne. This is a message from a woman from the land, but I wanted to share because she speaks from the trees, what the trees has to say, and the memory that the trees are having from the old times of colonization as well. So what will the trees say if we could listen to them, if we could talk with them? They have a lot to say. Nature has a lot to say. And yeah, we came here to also to share from the land, and to share with others from different cultures, from different countries, governments, because we are not having enough in our land. So we came here for that. We've been working on trying to denounce and to show the impacts of plantations, plantations that are not forest for us. They are reproducing monoculture, monocultural logic that is not our logic. It's a logic against life. But we have a huge plantations where I live, and I know in South America, South America, we have issues with plantations and many impacts in the waters, in the soil, in the air also, and in health. We're having issues of health, and sadly, the medicines that we took from the forest aren't there as well because of plantations. So we are taking out from our medicines, from our health, from our source of health. And we believe we really need to heal also. So we've been working to trying to focus also the environmental issues and the socio-cultural issues that are together. In my country, in Chile, where I come from, the regions of plantations are in the forestry industry. And the forestry industry the region comes from the colony, from the colonizations. So there is a link since the colonization started, exploitation of nature, the coal resources for the big powers. They took the nature to the big powers, and we believe that we still have that logic. Our forests are still being exploited to the consumption, to the capitalism consumption. So we're here also to look for solutions that focus on the change of consumption as well. Where are those changes? Where are we thinking from our daily lives, lifestyles, and yeah, so I wanted to just link, and thank you for giving the space to link how the colonization provided more exploitation to the land, and today we are still reproducing colonialism logics to the production system in the north and global also. There's much to say and to bring from the territories. So we always embrace that. Let's listen to the solutions that the people has. Let's give the space. Let's open the space. Let's open the knowledge, and to respect the knowledge as well. Yes. So thank you.
Thank you, Camila. Many thanks. Yeah, Andrea, you have the floor.
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea Echeverri. I'm currently the Unsustainable Livestock and Agriculture Coordinator for Global Forest Coalition. I am Colombian, and before assuming this role, I had also been involved with several struggles against mining, against hydropower dams, against monoculture, tree plantation. And then in a context of being involved with a lot of environmental conflicts, arrived this magic wand that was the payment for environmental services. There was RED after RED Plus. So when this boom came and they were promising benefits for people, for economy, for ecology, I thought this is basically too good for being true. and it was basically too good for being true. I am Colombian, and I'm based in the Colombian side. And what has happened in Colombia regarding those mechanisms, it's an example of what has happened everywhere. Colombia is a country that has still 50% forests, but that's not thanks to our government policies, who has always relied on the international division of work that has been effectively colonialistic, that has been told us and obliged us to relate in different manners with non-human nature. So we still have those remaining forests despite the policy of the Colombian states, and not thanks to it. We have these forests remaining thanks to the 67 indigenous nations that we have in Colombia, to the Afro-descendant populations that we have in Colombia, and to peasant farmers in Colombia, including the crucial roles of women. So Red's aiming at many things, and one of them, allegedly, is to include these impoverished communities in like the economic system that has kept pushing them away. Also, Red, allegedly, it's something that's aiming to reduce deforestation emissions from deforestation and degradation of forests. And there you can see where the devil is in the details, as publication of a report of Friends of the International stated a long time ago while analyzing several RED contracts in the Peruvian and Brazilian Amazon. Because RED is not actually talking about avoiding emissions. It's not actually talking about avoiding deforestation. It's talking about reducing the emissions that it will cause deforesting. I don't know, an hectare or 50% of that hectare. So if you only log the 50% of that hectare, you will still have reduced emissions. So actually, the tricky part of RED is that it's still allowing you to log off the forest. So it has failed, at least in the ecological part. And when we're talking about the social part that RED has been promoting to include and to give benefits to these impoverished communities, what we can actually see is that they might have received some benefit, usually men in communities, but how much is it? How much will it cost to leave behind the practices that have actually kept their forest alive, that had actually been able to relate to the forest in a different and non-market way, but that has allowed them to keep living and to keep living with the forest, not in face, not against the forest. So RED has failed in its basic core. Is a mechanism rotten at the core, and it can basically just be fixed and shifted around because it's been really controversial whether it has worked or not, but I think the reality shows that it hasn't worked in any of their purposes. It has left instead the division between the communities, the loss of the culture, the same culture that has allowed those forests to remain still living. It has also led to a loss of rights in some cases in different countries, and there are a lot of reports where you can find that. So right now, there's a moment to actually think on how can we rely the future on such a mechanism that has proven that in 20 years, in 15 years, the result and the money that has been invested on it, that hasn't been little money, is actually giving results. So I feel like if we've had before fights for our forest, if we had first fight for our lands, now the fight is also for air, the fight is for our future. Our future is not for sale, our forests are not for sale, and we need all of us to make it happen, to make happen a world when we can fit many worlds. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, many thanks, Andrea, and also to keep it to 3-4 minutes apart. If you can also do the same, and then we have some time for discussion and questions. Go ahead.
It will be interesting at this point to remember the 2009 obligations of the Global North to for $100 billion of climate finance. And we know it has not been fulfilled. Whereas what we see is that rather they have contributed to this illusionary policy push for generating climate finance through market-based mechanisms. Public money have been spent on carving out global agreements which produce these false solutions, which we all have heard today, and thereby hiding the rising and continuing emissions, and save high-emitting sectors like oil and gas, transport, industrial agriculture, and the rich and destructive corporates. Now, such agreements have initiated a gold rush to establish policy frameworks and take legislative actions at global, national, and subnational levels to capture that illusionary climate finance by promoting also carbon markets and false and disastrous solutions. Best example right now, as we can see how the REDD plus REDD readiness mechanism in countries like Gabon, Guyana, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, Colombia, DRC, have been just transformed into REDD plus credits in the voluntary carbon market, you know? And recent examples, if we give like Zimbabwe, Kenya, or Gabon, how precious domestic resources in these debt-ridden countries are being used to appropriate carbon trading. Because global South governments, which are starved of climate finance, see selling carbon credits as their best hope for adaptation, mitigation, or development finance, or debt relief of any kind. And in this regard, we can mention the recent declaration of the Zimbabwean government, which clearly says that the state will sell carbon rights. And this appropriation, by this appropriation, we are going back to the colonial times, and which has huge impact on the rights of the indigenous people and communities there, because it's the same colonial power which appropriated their rights. So if you appropriate carbon rights, we come to that colonial phase where the community's rights will be totally taken away. And we want to also remind everybody that these schemes which are mostly publicly subsidized, and they don't actually have any kind of climate benefit rather than resulting in plenty of local harm. So, and carbon credit exporting strategy seems to be a clear case of neocolonialism and is likely to add to the ongoing net transfer of capital from global south to global north. And this we have to realize. So basically the developed nations and the global north have to divest their public funding from market-based solutions and carbon trading. Instead, that public funding should be directed to fund real solutions: just transition, climate resilience of frontline communities, conservation, protection of land and forest, and reforestation. And provide direct funding access to indigenous peoples, women from frontline communities, and local communities. And in this respect, I think I'll go back to Corina to see that we are going to launch a kind of a campaign brief, which is very conceptual at this point, calling the global north to divest from funding for solutions, instead redirect that public funding towards real solutions. Thank you.
Thanks, Aparna. Yes, so just very quickly, so we have some minutes for questions from the audience. As Aparna say, well, first I'd like to thank all our panelists and mention that what we have heard here today is an outline or a concept note of a new global campaign that we are launching to demand pretty much what Suparna says, so the halting and the divestment of climate finance, public climate finance, of false solutions to climate change, and redirect this finance from these false solutions and use it instead to support real gender-just and right-based solutions and approaches to the climate crisis, as these are, the genuine pathways to limit global warming to 1.5. And this campaign will be further developed throughout the year and upcoming years, but we would like to invite climate justice movements, indigenous peoples organizations, women and gender rights organizations, and any allies to join us in these overall demands. And you can approach me after the press conference if you want to know more about the campaign and you do want to get a small briefing that we just launched today. But for now, I leave it at that, and I'll open we have 5 minutes, so that's good. 5-6 minutes for questions, so I'll open the floor for that. Any questions for our panelists today?
Hello. Hello, thank you. I'm Craig Hutton from the University of Southampton in the UK. It strikes me that what we're talking about here is the green accountancy, the full understanding of the benefits of primary forest. I think there's been a false equation relationship between plantation and what primary forest provides. And as you say, that's scientifically, unquestionable. Erosion, lost biodiversity, cultural context. You can't replace that with simple plantation. Has, to your knowledge, there been much work on actually trying to, and I understand why this may be not what people initially wanted, to actually put some sort of accountancy on this, the actual volumes, the actual numbers, to fight back, to actually put numbers, because I think that's what we need to be doing, perhaps, maybe not.
Well, there's certainly a fight back going on. I come from Australia, and I think we may be the only country in the world which has actually declared that biomass from natural forests is not a renewable energy. And that is actually official government policy, and there will be no subsidies flowing for anything that comes from our native forests. There has been work done in the forests of Australia to work out the relative amounts of carbon stored in primary forests, secondary forests and plantations. And in the ecologies there, once a primary forest is logged and brought into production, then around 60% of the carbon is lost, and it may, as it then regrows, well, probably more carbon is lost, but as it regrows into secondary forests, they cycle around in logging rotations at between 60% and 40% less carbon than was there in the primary forest. So you've still got it up in the atmosphere. And then if you convert to plantation, you lose 80% of the forest carbon and never get it back. There have been other studies done in the US, which will show similar but not exactly the same numbers, because we're talking about different ecologies. So that's what's been done. We haven't actually tried to put some carbon accounting figures on it, but we do have that science, and it's very well known. It's just ignored in places like the UNFCCC, and in fact in the UN generally, because of the FAO definition of forests, which says that it's just about forest cover. As long as there's something there that will one day grow to it's not very many metres, and not very many of them per hectare, then you can call it a forest. And so this is undifferentiated. And when you talk about deforestation, all you've got to do is say, oh, look, we intend within the next 50 years to have a bit of a plantation with a few trees here and there, and it's no longer deforestation. It's absolutely outrageous and has no relationship to reality.
Thanks, Peg. We have just one more minute. I wonder if one of you might want to give a final remark, and with that we would close the press conference. Anyone? Yeah?
Finally, what we want to say that if you go through our briefing paper, you will find that we have kind of got some data of how much public funding, billions of dollars, have gone into funding these forest solutions, right from plantations, including the Bonn Agreement, which has got 45% of the projects under plantations, including biomass, where Japan, South Korea, UK are subsidizing billions of dollars to produce bioenergy. And then we move on to REDD+, where we all know 5 of the known countries, Norway, UK, Germany, the US, have been funding for the last almost 10 to 13 years, billions of dollars into REDD+. And all these are our public money, your public money, and that has to stop. Please divest public finance from promoting and financing false solutions. We need money for real solutions. Give us that.
Thanks. So they are signaling me that our time is over. Yeah, many thanks again, and we will stay by the door a few more minutes for more questions, and also so my colleague Camila can share a campaign they are doing against biomass, a Latin American campaign, and to share some materials with you. So just approach us by the door. Thanks.